Welcome to the Allison Knows podcast. Today we're diving deep into Ecclesiastes.
Ooh.
This book is ancient,
Yeah.
but it's surprisingly relevant to our modern lives.
Right?
It's this philosophical exploration of life's meaning,
Okay.
written from the perspective of the preacher,
Interesting.
often thought to be King Solomon.
Uh-huh.
And get this,
Okay.
he doesn't sugarcoat anything.
It's true. The preacher really grapples with the big questions like good and evil justice, the fact that life is fleeting,
Yeah.
and even whether all our efforts ultimately amount to anything.
Right.
It's a bit unsettling, but
Yeah.
also strangely compelling.
It's like he's giving us permission to admit
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes life feels kind of meaningless,
Yeah.
even if we have everything going for us.
Mm.
So where do we even begin with a book like this?
Well, it all starts with that iconic line,
Which is
vanity of vanities, all is vanity.
Yeah.
It's not exactly a cheery pick-me-up,
right.
but it sets the stage for the whole book.
And it's not just that one line.
Right.
The preacher keeps coming back to this idea of vanity.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about this concept that's so central to understanding Ecclesiastes?
It's all about understanding the Hebrew word for vanity,
Okay.
hevel.
Hever.
It means breath vapor or futility.
Okay.
It's like trying to grasp smoke.
Yeah.
It's there for a moment, then it's gone.
Right.
The preacher uses hevel to describe pretty much everything we chase after in this world.
Interesting.
Wealth, pleasure, even wisdom.
So it's not that these things are bad in themselves.
Right.
It's that they don't last.
Exactly.
They're not a solid foundation for meaning.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the preacher goes to great lengths to illustrate this.
Yeah.
He describes his own experience
Okay.
with chasing after these vanities.
Okay.
He built houses, planted vineyards, amassed fortunes, you name it.
Wow.
He wanted to see for himself if these things could bring lasting satisfaction.
And what did he find?
Yeah,
Did all that wealth and success make him happy?
that's the irony. He calls it all vexation of spirit.
Oh, wow.
He realized that no matter how much he achieved, it never quite filled the void. It was
Yeah.
like drinking salt water.
Uh-huh.
It only made him thirstier.
This is kind of mind-blowing
Yeah.
because we're so conditioned to believe that success equals happiness.
Right.
The preacher is basically turning that idea on its head.
He is.
Wow.
And it's a perspective that's so relevant today.
Okay.
We're constantly bombarded with messages about acquiring more, achieving more, being more.
Okay.
But the preacher is urging us to step back and ask,
What's he urging us to ask?
is this really what matters?
Okay.
Will this bring lasting fulfillment?
It's like we're on this treadmill,
Mm-hmm.
running and running, but never really getting anywhere.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
The preacher describes this cyclical nature of life,
Yeah.
the sun rising and setting, generations coming and going.
Mm-hmm.
He sees it all as evidence that we're caught in this loop of striving and grasping,
Yeah.
but never truly finding satisfaction.
So what's the alternative? Is the
Yeah.
preacher saying we should just give up and do nothing?
Not at all.
Okay.
Remember, the preacher is deeply aware of life's vanities,
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't advocate for despair.
Okay.
He actually points us towards a different way of experiencing the world.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
The preacher emphasizes that even within this world of fleeting pleasures,
Mm-hmm.
there are glimpses of genuine joy.
Okay.
He highlights simple things, eating, drinking, finding satisfaction in your work.
Okay.
He even says,
What does he say?
there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil.
So it's not about denying ourselves pleasure
Right.
or rejecting the good things in life.
Exactly.
It's about how we approach them.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about recognizing the temporary nature of earthly things,
Mm-hmm.
but still finding joy in the present moment.
Yeah.
It's about appreciating the gift, not clinging to it, as if it's the source of our happiness.
It's like savoring a delicious meal without obsessing over the calories or enjoying a beautiful sunset without worrying about what tomorrow will bring.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay.
And this is one of the key takeaways from Ecclesiastes. Finding meaning in life isn't about chasing fleeting vanities,
Yeah.
but about appreciating the gifts of the present moment.
That's actually very freeing
Right.
because it takes the pressure off needing to achieve some grand goal
Mm-hmm.
in order to be happy.
Uh-huh.
But I'm also curious about the role of wisdom in all of this.
Yeah.
The preacher is known for his wisdom.
Right.
So how does that fit into this picture of finding meaning amidst vanity?
That's a fantastic question.
Okay.
And one that the preacher grapples with throughout the book. While he clearly values wisdom,
Okay.
he also recognizes its limitations.
Wait, wisdom has limitation. I thought it was supposed to be the key to a good life.
It can be, but the preacher makes this striking observation.
What's that?
In much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow.
So he's saying that the more we understand about the world,
Right.
the more we become aware of its complexities, its pain, and its injustices. So it's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yes.
And that can be a bit overwhelming.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the preacher isn't saying we should avoid knowledge or wisdom.
Okay.
He's saying that even with wisdom, we can't fully grasp God's work or the mysteries of the universe.
I see.
We have to embrace our limitations.
It's like admitting that we're not in control.
Exactly.
Which can be a hard pill to swallow.
Right.
Especially in a culture that values individual achievement and self-reliance.
It is.
Yeah.
But the preacher suggests that there's a certain freedom in acknowledging our limitations.
Okay.
It allows us to let go of the need to have all the answers to control everything to be perfect.
So we've got fleeting pleasures, limited wisdom, and a world full of vanities. It's a lot to process.
It is.
But the preacher must offer some hope, right?
He does.
Okay.
And it's tied to this idea of accepting what we can and cannot control.
Interesting.
He famously says,
yeah.
to everything there is a season and a time, to every purpose under the heaven.
Yeah, I love that quote.
He then lists contrasting pairs, birth and death planting and plucking up war and peace.
I see.
He's reminding us that life is full of both good and bad times.
Yeah.
And we have to accept that we can't control the flow of these seasons.
So it's like saying we can't control the waves,
Uh-huh.
but we can learn to surf.
Yes.
There's beauty and challenge in every season.
Beautifully put.
Okay.
And that acceptance, that letting go of control,
Right.
is a big part of finding peace amidst the vanities. It's about embracing the present moment, whether it's a season of joy or a season of sorrow,
Right.
and finding the meaning within it.
This makes me think about all the things we stress about today.
Yeah.
Work deadlines,
Uh-huh.
social media,
Yeah.
keeping up with the Joneses. Are these our modern-day vanities?
That's a brilliant question. And I
Okay.
think the preacher would definitely encourage us to ponder that.
Yeah.
Are we letting these temporary things steal our joy and distract us from what truly matters?
Right.
Are we chasing after the wind?
This is such a thought-provoking conversation.
It is.
And I know we've just scratched the surface of Ecclesiastes. Before we continue, I want to remind our listeners to like, subscribe, and share this podcast.
Great idea.
Join Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube.
Yes.
We'll be right back to continue our exploration of this incredible book.
Welcome back to the Allison Knows podcast. We're deep in the wisdom of Ecclesiastes, exploring the preacher's insights on life meaning and that all-encompassing theme of vanity.
Before we went to break, we were talking about how even wisdom has its limitations. And that really struck a chord with me. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if we just learn enough or achieve enough, we'll finally have it all figured out.
It's a tempting illusion, isn't it? But the preacher reminds us that even the wisest among us are still grappling with life's big questions. There are some mysteries we simply can't unravel, no matter how hard we try.
And that can be a bit unsettling. It's like realizing that even with all the knowledge in the world, we're still standing on shaky ground.
It is, but there's also a certain beauty in that realization. It forces us to confront our own limitations, to let go of the illusion of control, and to embrace the mystery of existence.
It's like admitting that we're not the center of the universe.
Exactly, and that humility, that willingness to acknowledge that there's something greater than ourselves, is a crucial step towards finding meaning.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If we're constantly focused on our own achievements and desires, we miss out on the bigger picture.
We do. And speaking of missing the bigger picture, the preacher has some fascinating things to say about the futility of labor.
This is something I really struggle with. Sometimes it feels like I'm working so hard, but for what? It's like I'm on this treadmill, constantly striving, but never really getting anywhere.
The preacher captures that feeling perfectly. He dedicates a significant portion of the text to exploring this idea that work, despite being necessary and often fulfilling, can also feel meaningless in the grand scheme of things. He even uses the phrase vexation of spirit to describe it.
It's like you pour your heart and soul into something. You build things, you achieve success, But then what, it all just gets left behind for someone else.
That's exactly what the preacher observes. He talks about how we leave our hard-earned possessions to someone else who may not have worked for them, who may not even appreciate them. He sees this as another example of hevel, the fleeting nature of all our earthly efforts.
It's a sobering thought. It makes you question whether it's all worth it.
It does. But it's not meant to discourage us from working or achieving. The preacher isn't advocating for laziness or apathy. Instead, he's challenging us to examine our motivations. Are we working for lasting legacy, which he suggests is an illusion, or are we working for something more intrinsic?
So it's not about the outcome, it's about the process.
That's one way to look at it. The preacher highlights the importance of finding enjoyment in the work itself, the good in his labor, as he puts it. But he also acknowledges that even that enjoyment is a gift from God, not something we can manufacture on our own.
So even our ability to find joy in work is ultimately dependent on something beyond ourselves.
That's the implication, and it brings us back to this idea of recognizing the limits of our control, a theme that runs throughout Ecclesiastes.
It's a theme that resonates with me. It's so easy to get caught up in the illusion that we're in control of our lives, but then something happens that throws everything off balance.
Exactly. And the preacher takes this idea a step further by confronting the ultimate reality: we all face death.
Death. That's a bit heavy for a podcast.
It might seem that way, but the preacher doesn't use death to instill fear. Instead, he uses it to highlight the preciousness of life. He states, "How dieth the wise man as the fool?" He sees death as the great equalizer, the shared fate of both the wise and the foolish.
It's like he's saying that no matter what you achieve in this life, in the end, we all end up in the same place.
Precisely, and that realization can be incredibly liberating. It frees us from the need to constantly strive for more, to compare ourselves to others, to cling to titles and possessions.
It's a powerful reminder to focus on what truly matters.
It is, and it leads us to another crucial point, that the preacher makes the limitations of human understanding. He spends a lot of time exploring the mysteries of life, the things we can't fully comprehend, like the workings of fate and the vastness of the universe.
That resonates with me. There are so many things in life that just don't make sense no matter how hard I try to figure them out.
It's a universal human experience, and the preacher encourages us to embrace that mystery, to accept that we don't have all the answers.
It's about letting go of the need to control everything.
Exactly. It's about surrendering to the unknown and finding peace in that surrender.
This has been such an insightful conversation. It's really making me think differently about how I approach life.
That's the power of Ecclesiastes. It's a book that challenges our assumptions and prompts us to reconsider what truly matters.
And speaking of things that matter, I want to remind our listeners to like, subscribe, and share this podcast. You can also join Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be right back to finish our deep dive into the wisdom of Ecclesiastes. Welcome back to the Allison Knows podcast. We're wrapping up our deep dive into Ecclesiastes, and I'm so curious to hear what the preacher ultimately concludes about finding meaning in a world that often feels meaningless.
Well, after all his searching and questioning, the preacher arrives at a surprisingly simple answer.
Oh, okay.
In the book's final verses, he says, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man."
I have to admit the phrase fear God always throws me off a bit. Sounds a little intimidating. Is he saying we should be terrified of God?
Not exactly. In this context, fear isn't about being scared. It's more about having deep respect and reverence for God. It's recognizing that there's a power greater than ourselves, and that we should live our lives in alignment with that power.
So it's about acknowledging our place in the grand scheme of things.
Precisely. And that acknowledgement leads to the second part of his statement:
Which is,
keep his commandments. This suggests that following God's guidance is the path to a meaningful life.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
If we see God as the source of all goodness and truth,
Right.
then aligning our lives with His will would naturally lead us towards a more purposeful existence.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our lives aren't just about our own individual pursuits and desires. There's something bigger at play here.
Right.
And our purpose is connected to that, something bigger.
You know, it's interesting how the preacher frames this as our duty. It's not just a suggestion, it's like our ultimate responsibility.
And that responsibility ties back to all his observations about vanity. Remember, he starts and ends the book with pronouncements of vanity,
Right.
emphasizing that focusing solely on worldly pursuits ultimately leads to emptiness.
So it's not that wealth, pleasure, or wisdom are bad in themselves.
Right.
It's that they become meaningless if we make them our ultimate goal.
That's the point. They're meant to be enjoyed as gifts from God, not worshipped as idols.
It makes me think about how we often measure success today. Money, fame, power. Are these our modern-day idols? The things that distract us from our true purpose?
That's a great question to consider. What are the things we're chasing after that might be leading us away from what truly matters? How can we shift our focus to align with a higher purpose?
So in a practical sense, what does it look like to fear God and keep his commandments in today's world?
Well, different faiths and individuals will interpret that in their own ways, but at its core, I think it's about living a life of integrity, compassion, and service to others. It's about recognizing that our actions have consequences both in this life and beyond. It's about striving to embody love, kindness, and justice in all that we do.
It's about recognizing that we're all connected and that our actions ripple outward, impacting the world around us.
Beautifully put. And it's about seeking wisdom and guidance from a source beyond ourselves, whether that's through prayer meditation or simply reflecting on the teachings of those who have come before us.
It's about humility, isn't it? Recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that we need to be open to learning and growing.
Absolutely. It's about embracing the mystery of life and approaching it with a sense of awe and wonder.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on Ecclesiastes.
It's a book that never ceases to amaze me. It's so layered and complex, and it speaks to something deep within the human soul.
It really does. And it's so relevant to our lives today. Even though it was written thousands of years ago, it grapples with questions that we're still asking ourselves. What is the meaning of life? How do we find happiness in a world of suffering and change? What is our purpose?
And while Ecclesiastes doesn't offer easy answers or a clear roadmap, it does offer something incredibly valuable. A framework for navigating life's complexities with wisdom, humility, and a sense of awe. It encourages us to embrace the present moment, to find joy in the simple things, and to live our lives with purpose and intention.
It's been a true deep dive. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredible book.
It's been my pleasure. The wisdom of Ecclesiastes is a gift that keeps on giving.
And to our listeners, we hope you found this exploration of Ecclesiastes as insightful as we did. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can find us on Spotify and YouTube by searching for Allison Knows. Thank you for listening to the Allison Knows podcast. Follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of knowledge and ideas.